Yeah, so your question about the benefits of vaccination waning, yes, there is evidence that the vaccines over time, that the antibody levels for protection have been waning. So much so that the CDC is now considering recommending a booster dose for those who have been previously vaccinated as a way to improve the protection afforded by the vaccine. And that's not actually uncommon. We've seen this with other vaccines in the past, including for childhood vaccinations, where over time there's been a recognition that the immunity provided by the vaccine has waned. Mumps is a good example. So what we saw with mumps vaccine was that there were outbreaks of mumps in college campuses. So there's a recognition that even though those students were vaccinated as children, that because the immunity to that vaccine waned over time, there's a recommendation that those college students and other kids, other folks of that similar age get a booster dose of vaccine. So it's not uncommon to see that happen, and we're seeing that with the COVID vaccine.
I just have one other question that was also brought up during public comment, and that is about the vaccine being experimental and the studies on the vaccine. So is the vaccine still considered experimental, and are there still studies going on with the vaccine?
It is.
Yeah, so
that's a stupid question.
The vaccines were released under emergency use authorization, or EIU, because there was a public health emergency and there was a need to get the vaccines out as soon as possible to vaccinate people as a way to deal with this pandemic. Now, one of the three vaccines, the Pfizer vaccine, has recently been given a full approval and authorization.
That's a lie.
Please be quiet so that we can hear all these.
Please show some respect. Thank you. She's got a little hammer, sir. He does have a medical degree. You asked.
Go ahead, Dr. Buff, I apologize.
So this idea that it's an experimental vaccine, I recognize people's concern about that, because it's a vaccine that has, to the public's viewpoint, has been released very quickly without a lot of good studies or data behind it. And that is not the case. The technology around the mRNA vaccine has been in place for a couple decades. And the COVID vaccine that has been developed, although it's developed very recently, the FDA still went through all the same steps that it normally goes through to approve a vaccine, except that those steps were expedited, and in some cases, some of the phases of that approval process were overlapped. So what happened with this is that they continued to study the safety and efficacy of the vaccine, while at the same time they're actually starting to produce the vaccine. So once the safety and efficacy data came back, they actually had vaccine available to start to vaccinate individuals. Yeah, so the CDC continues to recommend vaccination for those folks who have a prior infection with COVID.
Why?
And they're doing that because there's insufficient data now to show that prior infection will confer long-term immunity. We know that the vaccine does confer immunity, so the CDC continues to recommend that people get vaccinated even after having a past infection with this. Although I will say that in the future that may change. There may be more evidence that suggests that a natural infection may confer appropriate immunity for the life of the individual. We've seen that with other vaccine-preventable diseases in the past, but at this point we don't have enough real good data to suggest that that is the case, which is why we're continuing to recommend vaccine for those folks.
Touching your mask, Mr.
The
Medical
forerunner is it.
I heard a lot of individuals share that vaccination has not been rigorously tested. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate. Before the vaccine was actually given to people, they went through extensive clinical trials to demonstrate the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. And then once the vaccine has been made available to the public, there's ongoing clinical trials to look at the safety and long-term safety and efficacy of the vaccine. There's also several other efforts in place. I think you heard mention of the VAERS, which is a vaccine adverse events reporting system.
You're touching your mask, Mr. Medical Expert.
Misconceptions about what VAERS is and what the data is about that. So I just want to correct that if I may. So VAERS is essentially what we call in the public health world a surveillance system. So this particular surveillance system, healthcare providers, members of the general public who have been vaccinated against any vaccine, if they feel that they've had any sort of adverse effects to it, they can report this information to this surveillance system. The data that you heard around thousands of people dying as a result of vaccination, that data is likely attributed to the VAERS. Why that is that if an elderly person got the vaccine and 2 days later they had a heart attack and died, people can report that information to VAERS. However, that does not indicate that there's a causal relationship between getting the vaccine and dying. I've heard reports of people getting heart attacks 2 days after receipt of vaccine, and that being reported to VAERS. There's no, it certainly is a coincidence that they died after receiving that vaccine, but physiologically and pathologically, there's no reason that vaccine would have caused that person to die from a heart attack. It's likely a long-standing coronary artery disease that led to that. So we really have to separate this mess, if you will, of people attributing these side effects to the vaccine to really look at what the true side effects are. And I will say that long-term those studies, use of VAERS and other things have been really effective for the public health community to really identify some very rare and potentially life-threatening side effects, including myocarditis, pericarditis with the mRNA vaccine, as well as diseases that causes thrombosis among recipients of the Johnson vaccine. So with that said,
But he's touched it more than Fauci has.
that's a good indicator that we have really good good systems in place to be able to monitor these side effects, and when there's an indication that it may truly be attributed to the vaccine, then there's more research and looking into these potential cases, and recommendations are made based on the results of that review.
Thank you. Brought up during public comment is that the vaccine is not effective and that this is not the best way to save lives and prevent sickness. Is that also accurate?
Yeah, again, that is not accurate. The vaccine, of course, is effective. It's actually very effective. It's very effective at preventing very severe illness, hospitalization, and death. We know
It's
that
also effective
just
at
by
causing
the
it, too.
statistic I provided to you before. It's also very effective at preventing infection and subsequently then preventing transmission of the disease. I will say though, it's not 100% effective. We obviously know of cases of COVID in folks who have been fully vaccinated. These are called breakthrough infections. We are monitoring that. The CDC is monitoring that.
Keep touching your mask.
It happens, but again, it happens. Infections happen much less among people who are fully vaccinated than among those who are not vaccinated. Yeah, just to add to mRNA vaccines, and of course, mRNA is a genetic material, so perhaps people get confused about.
How long would the vaccine last before we would have to require a booster shot, assuming that we went forward with this? I'm trying to think forward if this was to pass. When would we expect that employees would then have to get either their second or third shot?
Yeah, so what we're currently hearing from the CDC is that the booster dose may need to be given 8 months after completion of the primary series. So if you finish your primary series of either the mRNA vaccines in February, for example, then 8 months later you would be eligible for that booster dose. Again, this is pending full review and approval by FDA and recommendations by CDC.
Okay, so currently we're not even selling our employees on just getting vaccinated. We're kind of gonna have to assume that they'll be continually getting vaccinated at least next
Trustee
year.
Ford, can you speak a little bit closer to the microphone?
My bad.
Thank you.
So I'm just saying we're not just only selling on getting vaccinated within the next 45 days. We're also, there's an expectation that they will have to get vaccinated again or get another booster 8 months later. So just want to kind of, and maybe later.
Please be quiet in the audience, please, so while the trustee is talking.
Another kind of
I'm sorry, do you mind if I comment on your question?
Yes, go ahead.
So again, there's no recommendation as yet to get a booster dose. The data is still being reviewed by FDA and being considered by CDC. It's been said that we might be able to begin to start giving a booster dose as early as September 20th, but at this time there's no recommendation to do that. Pending review of all the data and issuance of some recommendations.
Was to mandate this versus we don't, and how would that affect, say, the city and the hospitals and that curve there?
Well, again, the most important thing here is what we know with the vaccine is it's effective at preventing a whole host of things, serious disease, hospitalization, death, and also can prevent or reduce the likelihood of infection and transmission. Again, it's not a 100% perfect vaccine in any of these regards, but it's better than not having a vaccine. So I think in the context of that, I think if you want to speculate, if you will, about if you do mandate the vaccination of all your employees and staff, and you get a high participation rate, then what you're going to, based on what I just said before, what's going to happen is that you're going to reduce the likelihood of transmission of this virus within the classrooms, among teachers and between teachers and students. And in turn, if you reduce that transmission in the schools, and you may in turn be able to reduce the transmission of the virus within the community as well, because you have less students and less teachers being infected as well. So that's what happens when you increase your vaccination rates in susceptible populations, is that you reduce the likelihood of infection and transmission.
Okay, I'm good with questions right now, thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Ford.